Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and this is called the 3-act structure. Whether you're making a documentary film or a scripted story, understanding the 3-act structure will help you tell stories that keep people watching for longer.
I just wanna have fun, clap my hands.
In my own work, I found that using this structure made my films clearer and more effective.
I just wanna have fun, clap my hands, turn around now and dance, dance, dance.
Just made my stories easier to follow and more interesting for the audience. Even if you don't follow it exactly, having a plan, it just helps you to know where your story is going, and it's just a framework. To try to make it easier for you to envision like what's missing and what do I need to do right now. Act 1. This is where you begin. You introduce your characters and you set up the problem or conflict. Then in Act 2, the middle, that's where the main action happens. And your characters face challenges. Here, they try to solve the problem. But things get harder. And it's about building this tension and keeping the audience on the edge of their seats. Then in Act 3, the end, this is the resolution, where everything comes together. The characters find a way to solve their problems or they learn something very important. It's the part where we see the results of their journey. That's what leads to the resolution after the climax, and with all of that you have a film. In The Pearl of Africa, this was Cleo's surgery. We followed her through all the struggles she'd gone through, and now we see the result. It's a powerful moment where she almost dies, and this brings everything together when she survives, and like you can see that she has changed. And not just like physically, because she switches from male to female, but even bigger, I think the whole emotional state that happens. Like she's a new human, reborn, I would say. And a lot of people think that the 3-act structure is too rigid and, you know, it might limit creativity, but that's not really true. I used to think that it would make my films more boring, but I realized that it's about how you fill the structure. You have to find surprising moments and unique angles. And for example, in Puppy Mafia, I worked with investigative journalists to uncover the hidden layers of the illegal puppy trade. And this made the story more engaging and exciting because you could follow me and the investigation, and like you had stakes all the time in that TV show. Documentary filmmaking is different from fiction films though, because you can't control everything. You have to be flexible and ready to adapt. And in The Pearl of Africa, I used the traditional 3-act structure, but I let the real-life events guide the story and how I was shooting it. So how do you adapt them when like things don't go as planned? The answer is to just be creative. The hook is the opening moment of your film. It should raise questions, it should introduce the conflict, and it should show something interesting about your main character to keep people hooked. And I love how Steven Spielberg does this in his movies. His openings always make you want to keep watching, and you always get curious about the characters and the story. And in my documentaries, I often use voiceovers to get to the point quickly. And in The Pearl of Africa, I started with Cleo's voiceover talking about Uganda, and that immediately sets up the story conflict and it draws the viewers into the story.
I was born here.
And another example is Speedway, for instance. At the beginning of that, we see a coach deeply in love with his job. But As the story progresses, we see him question all that he loves about the sport. And
Jag tror inte banan vill jag inte hålla på med. Jag pallar inte banan. Nej, det får någon annan göra.
it creates a strong hook to make people curious about what happens next. I mean, will he quit? Will he keep going? You know, you see the problem piles up and how he's losing his love for the sport. I think those type of contradictions are really important. Character development is also key, and in documentaries this can be tricky because you don't always have time to show real change. But in The Pearl of Africa, Nelson, one of the characters, starts very shy and unsure but becomes strong and outspoken by the end. This was a transformation that made the story very compelling, and I couldn't plan for it. I started filming him and doubting that, like, will this ever work? He was so freaking boring in interviews, and I couldn't see how this would give anything to the film. And I kept filming and then trusted the process, and then all of a sudden it worked.
Get crazy. Like, I just...
Climax is one of the hardest parts of storytelling. You know, deciding when to end a story, that can be really tough. In The Pearl of Africa, I knew that the climax was Cleo's surgery. But sometimes you don't have clear endings, and you have to create one in the edit. And it's all about using the footage that you have to make a satisfying resolution. But it can be really hard, and when editing a film, you should always ask yourself, does this scene bring us closer to the climax? And if it doesn't, think about whether it needs to be there or if you need to change it. Your goal is to keep everything, you know, the story moving and keep the audience interested towards the climax. But the climax can be something that you don't discover or you don't really understand until you've edited like several cuts of your film. I don't know if you've been on this channel, you know about the project, but yeah, it's a fatal gold rush town in Canada. It's like a microcosm of the environmental conflicts that's going on in the world and how like communities, local communities are affected by mining corporations coming in. It's like this super complex story. So I have to tie it back to the First Nations community for the film to work, I think. And I haven't been able to do that. So it can sometimes mess up the edit and the storyline and how you make stories. But when you see that first cut and when you see how the film is working, you gotta ask yourself, like, what's missing and how can I make this better? In the beginning, I rushed my first film, Zero Silence. I should have waited. I know The Square was very similar to my film. My film was, you know, released before. That won an Oscar. That just taught me how important it is to not rush things. Just sit on it and just make the best film that you can make. Some people think, you know, structure limits creativity, but I just see it as a way to reach a wider audience. The 3-act structure, it helps your film to connect with people who might not usually watch documentaries in your topic. And you can shape it in a way that they are familiar with the story and can relate to it, and the structure helps with that. So you can still be creative and you should surprise your audience. For example, I mix traditional footage with animation in The Pearl of Africa, and it's just to show like inner thoughts and get closer to the characters. I'd done that in school when I was studying animation, but that was a long time ago. I just think that you should just push the boundaries of how you break up time, how you break up, you know, the linear type of storytelling. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of continuity. I think that all those things go out the window if you emotionally connect to the story. And I find that quite difficult when you're working with clients or like brands and all that. You always gotta remember that when you're telling a story, that maybe you need to dumb it down so that it works for more people, so that more people can connect with your story, because that's what you want in the end, I hope. By experimenting, you keep your work fresh and exciting, and you also keep learning and growing as a filmmaker. First, start by finding a hook. Make sure that your first scene grabs attention and ask a question or show something. Secondly, keep your middle interesting. The middle of your story is where many films lose the audience. So make sure that there are enough challenges and tension, the conflict should keep things exciting. Use surprising moments or turning points that can change the direction of the story. And 3, build a powerful climax. Make the climax big and emotional. It should feel like the most important moment of the film. In Speedway, the climax come from, when the season ends and the finale and the fights that's there in the finale, and then the internal struggle of the coach deciding should he continue or not. Make sure that the ending answers the big questions raised in your film as well. Because it doesn't have to be a happy ending, but it should feel complete. And in Puppy Mafia, the resolution shows the people involved and, it gives closure to the story. And be flexible and adapt as well, because you gotta remember you don't have to follow the 3-act structure perfectly. And then edit with structure in mind. Cut anything that doesn't serve the story. Use it as a guide, but don't be afraid to break the rules. And just make it your own. Trust your instincts and be creative, and keep telling stories that matter to you. And if you want help telling your story, then download my Hero's Journey cheat sheet on learndocumentary.com/dochero. I'll see you in the next one. Now, check out this video if you want to learn how to tell a better story.